The rope wasn't tight enough to cut off blood, just tight enough to say, "You don't leave until I say so." She stood at the hitching rail, outside the trading post, with her wrists bound in frayed hemp, boot heels in the dust, eyes fixed on the open prairie like she was already somewhere else. Her dress was worn from days of travel. Her hair had come loose from its pins. There was bruising beneath the rope, dark and deliberate, the kind that doesn't come from a single incident. 3 men stood within 20 feet of her. Not one of them looked at her. That was the part that stayed with Daniel Mercer. Not the rope, not the bruising, the not looking. The practiced blindness of men who had decided someone else's trouble wasn't worth the cost of noticing. Daniel leaned against the trading post rail with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand. He'd ridden in an hour ago with 3 weeks of beaver pelts and a list of supplies he needed before heading back into the high country. He wasn't looking for trouble. Wasn't looking for anything except flour, salt, ammunition, and maybe a conversation that wasn't with himself. Instead, he found this. The woman hadn't called for help, hadn't struggled, hadn't done anything except stand there with that rope on her wrists and her eyes on the horizon, like she was waiting for something only she could see. The man who'd tied her there had walked into the trading post 15 minutes ago. Daniel watched the door, waited. Sometimes things had explanations. Sometimes a man had a reason. The wind shifted across the yard, and Daniel caught sight of the bruising properly for the first time. Fresh. Both wrists. The rope had been on her before today. He set the coffee cup down on the rail. He crossed the yard slowly. No hurry, no announcement. The woman heard his boots in the dirt and turned her head slightly. Her eyes were dark, sharp, the kind of eyes that had learned to measure a man in the first 3 seconds and act accordingly. "You in trouble?" Daniel asked. She looked at him for a moment without answering, deciding. "Yes," she said. Just that. No trembling. No desperation. The word landed with the quiet certainty of someone who had already done the math on her situation and wasn't pretending otherwise. Daniel studied her for a moment. Then he reached for the rope. The hemp was rough. He pulled his knife and cut through it in one clean motion. The rope fell into the dust. "Can you ride?" "Yes." He pointed toward the mule tied at the far rail. "Go stand over there." She didn't move immediately. "Why are you helping me?" Daniel shrugged. "Because nobody else did." She walked toward the mule. Daniel was still holding the cut rope when the trading post door slammed open behind him. The man came out fast. He was wide across the shoulders, trail-dusted, with the kind of face that had learned to arrange itself into something resembling patience, while hiding something that wasn't patient at all. His eyes went to the empty post, then to the rope in Daniel's hand, then to Daniel. "You planning on explaining that?" Daniel leaned against the rail. "She says she doesn't belong to you." The man's jaw tightened. "She's mistaken." Didn't sound mistaken. The yard had gone quiet, the way yards go quiet when men sense the air changing. The ranch hands near the water trough drifted back. A woman on the porch of the trading post stepped inside. Nobody wanted to be standing in the wrong place. The man stepped closer. His hand drifted near the revolver on his belt, not touching it, just reminding Daniel it was there. "You got no idea what you're interfering with." Daniel's voice stayed level. "That might be true. The man stared at him for a long moment. Then he spat in the dirt. "This ain't finished." He walked to his horse, swung up, and rode hard toward the eastern road. The sound of hooves faded across the valley, like a sentence left unfinished. Daniel watched him go. Then he turned. Elena was watching him from beside the mule, with the careful expression of someone who'd learned that men who helped you usually wanted something for it. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elena." "Where are you headed?" She glanced at the empty road. "Anywhere but here." Daniel nodded. "That's a start." He untied the mule's reins. Dark clouds had gathered over the western hills while they'd been talking, the kind of sky that didn't ask permission before opening up. "Storm's coming," Daniel said. They had barely reached the road when the thunder of hooves came from the eastern ridge. 3 riders, moving fast. And at the front, riding with the unhurried authority of a man who expected everyone to stop what they were doing when he arrived, was Sheriff Callahan. And now, right here, while the rope is still lying in the trading post dust and those riders are closing fast, if you've ever seen someone look away when they should have looked in, go ahead and tap like and subscribe. Because this is a story about what happens when one man doesn't. Callahan pulled his horse to a stop and looked at the scene the way a man looks at a room after a fight, reading what happened from what was left behind. His eyes moved from Daniel to Elena, to the cut rope in the dirt. He took his time. "Well," he said, "this looks interesting." Daniel replaced his hat. "Afternoon, Sheriff. Mind telling me what happened here?" "Found her tied to the rail." Callahan looked at Elena. "That true?" "Yes." The sheriff nodded slowly. "And the man who tied you?" Daniel pointed toward the eastern road. "Rode toward town." Callahan sighed, the way men sigh when they've been hoping for a quiet afternoon, and the afternoon has other plans. Then he swung back into the saddle. "Looks like I better go catch up with him." He paused, looked at Daniel again. "You two might want to ride along." He didn't explain why. He didn't have to, because if what Callahan was thinking was true, this was already bigger than a cut rope at a trading post, and it was only going to get bigger. The town was called Harrow Creek, which was either poetic or ironic, depending on the kind of day you were having. One main street, weathered storefronts, a jailhouse with a crooked sign, the kind of place that had been built quickly and maintained reluctantly. When they rode in, the man from the wagon was already there. He stood outside the jailhouse with 2 other men, talking fast and low with one of the deputies. When he saw Daniel and Elena riding behind the sheriff, his expression cycled through surprise, irritation, and then settled into something that tried to look like confidence. He pointed at Daniel. "That's him." Callahan pulled his horse to a stop in the middle of the street. "All right, let's slow this down." The town was watching now. The way small towns watch, from doorways, from behind glass, from the edges of buildings, quiet and hungry for the story. "He stole her," the man said. Daniel blinked once. "Didn't steal anybody. You cut the rope." "Sure did." Callahan raised one hand. "Everybody quiet." He turned to Elena. "You know this man?" She shook her head. "No." The man's certainty cracked slightly. "She's lying." The sheriff scratched his beard. "Maybe." He turned to Daniel. "You know him?" "No." "Well," Callahan said, "that does simplify things." He walked to the man and held out his hand. "You got papers for whatever arrangement you're claiming?" The man hesitated, then reached into his coat and produced a folded document. Callahan read it slowly, read it again, folded it and handed it back. This says you were hired to escort a traveler. That's right. It doesn't say she's your prisoner. The man's face darkened. She tried to run. Elena's voice came quiet and clear. Because he lied. The street went still. Callahan looked at her. Go on. She drew a slow breath. He told me he would take me to the next town. She paused. He tried to sell me to a mining camp. The murmur that moved through the watching crowd wasn't surprise exactly. More like the sound people make when they hear something they half expected and fully dreaded. The man's voice hardened. Making that up. Callahan turned toward his deputies. Put him in the cell until we sort this out. The man started shouting as the deputies grabbed him. Something about rights and law and jurisdiction. His voice bounced off the buildings and fell apart in the mud. Callahan watched him go. Then he looked at Daniel. Coffee's decent at the saloon, he said. I'd suggest you don't leave town. Inside the saloon, the air was warm and smelled of wet wool and wood smoke. Daniel and Elena sat at a table near the window and didn't say much for a while. Outside, rain had started. Soft at first, then harder. Finally, Elena asked the question she'd been holding. Why did he lie? Daniel looked out at the rain moving across the street in long gray curtains. Because he thought nobody would challenge him. And you did. You didn't hesitate. Daniel smiled faintly. Oh, I hesitated. Then why? He leaned back in his chair. Because once you see something like that rope, he paused. It's hard to pretend you didn't. Elena looked at her hands on the table. The marks from the rope were still faint against her wrists. Neither of them noticed the man at the far end of the bar. He wasn't drinking. He was watching. Just enough to confirm things, just carefully enough to seem like he wasn't. Daniel noticed on his third glance. He kept his voice level. See the man with the gray hat? Elena didn't turn. I see him. He's been watching us. Do you know him? No, but he didn't ride into town alone. He was right. By the time Daniel processed the thought fully, the man in the gray hat had finished his drink, adjusted his coat, and walked quietly out into the rain. Daniel watched the door close. We're leaving tonight, he said. Sheriff Callahan looked unsurprised when they walked into the jailhouse. Figured you'd be back, he said. Daniel got to the point. The man you locked up, he got friends. Probably. Just saw one, gray hat, left the saloon 10 minutes ago. Callahan sighed. He stood, walked to the barred cell. The man from the wagon looked up from the bunk and smiled. Back again. Callahan ignored him. He turned to Elena. You want to tell me more about this mining camp arrangement? Elena's jaw tightened. He was going to sell my contract to a camp foreman. Told me we were going to Harrow Creek for supplies. Callahan nodded slowly. He walked to his desk and opened a drawer. 2 rifles. He handed one to Daniel. Just in case, he said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You expecting trouble? I'd rather you were prepared. From inside the cell, the man spoke. Her father offered $5,000. The room went quiet. Callahan turned slowly. The man smiled. For whoever brings her back. Daniel looked at Elena. She stared at the wall. Your father. Daniel said quietly. Yes. He knows where you are? He hired men to find me. She paused. He owns mines back east. He wants me married to a business partner. Daniel absorbed that. And you refused. Yes. That's why you ran. Yes. From the cell. $5,000 is real money, Mercer. Daniel looked at him evenly. So it is. He picked up the rifle. We'll take the canyon road, Callahan said. Anyone following will expect the main trail. He paused at the door. Daniel. Yeah. Don't underestimate these people. A man who'd put a price on his own daughter isn't the kind who gives up easy. The rain slowed just after dark. They rode out quietly. The street was empty. The last lamp in the saloon threw a yellow square of light onto the mud, and then they were past it, past the last building, past the last fence post, out into the wide, dark prairie, with the storm rolling east, and the stars beginning to push through behind it. Elena rode behind Daniel on the mule. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then she said, If they catch us, they won't hurt you. That right. They'll just take me. Daniel kept his eyes on the road. Then I guess we don't get caught. She was quiet again. Then, you still don't know me. Nope. Then why does it matter to you? Daniel thought about that for a moment. About the 3 men who had stood 20 feet from that hitching rail and chosen not to see. About the coffee going cold in his hand. About the practiced blindness that had let a woman stand tied to a post in broad daylight while men talked about the weather. Because it mattered this morning, he finally said. And I don't know how to make it stop. Elena didn't answer. The canyon road opened up ahead of them, narrow and shadow-deep, walls rising on both sides until the sky became a dark strip above. They rode in silence. An hour passed, then 2. Daniel had almost started to believe they'd slipped away clean when he heard it. Hooves, behind them, coming fast. Elena heard it too. How many? Daniel listened. 3. He guided the mule off the road toward a cluster of rocks where the canyon wall bent outward, offering cover on 2 sides. Not perfect, but enough. We make our stand here, he said. Elena slid down from the saddle. She didn't ask if they could run. She already knew the answer. Daniel checked the rifle. The riders came around the bend at a hard gallop and pulled up sharp when they saw Daniel standing in the road with the rifle raised. The man in the gray hat rode at the front. He looked at Daniel for a long moment. Then he smiled. Well now, that didn't take long. What do you want? Daniel asked. You know what we want. Elena stepped forward beside Daniel. No. The man's smile didn't change. That's not how this works. Daniel's voice was steady. Tonight it is. The first shot shattered the canyon silence like a bell struck too hard. Daniel fired before the echo finished rolling across the rocks. The rider on the left went sideways in the saddle and dropped. The other 2 split immediately, pulling their horses behind opposite rock faces on either side of the road. Elena crouched beside the mule with the rifle Callahan had given her, held steady against her shoulder. The man in the gray hat called from cover. You can't hold us here all night, trapper. Daniel didn't answer. He settled against the rock and waited. He'd spent 30 years in wilderness that wanted him dead. He knew how to wait. A minute passed, 2. Then one of the riders leaned out just slightly, trying to find an angle, and Daniel fired. The man jerked back with a curse. The gray hat man called again. You know why we're here. It doesn't have to go this way. Daniel called back. You're right. You could leave. Silence. Then, quietly, from beside him, Elena spoke. He won't stop. No. My father won't stop either. I know. She was quiet for a moment. You understand what you're in the middle of. Daniel checked the rifle, getting clearer all the time. She looked at him in the darkness with an expression he couldn't fully read. You could still walk away. Daniel lowered the rifle slightly. Could have done that at the trading post, he said. She nodded slowly, then raised her own rifle toward the rocks on the left. On your right, she said quietly. Daniel turned. The second rider had moved, circling wide, trying to come in from the canyon wall above. Daniel fired once. The man scrambled back. Elena fired at the rocks on the left, forcing the gray hat man down. For a moment, the canyon fell completely still. Then Daniel stepped out from behind the rock. It's done, he called. Send your man out. A long pause. Then the gray hat man stood slowly, hands open. His partner emerged from the far side, rifle lowered. The first man was still on the ground. Daniel approached carefully. He was breathing. Shoulder wound. He'd live. Daniel looked at the gray hat man. Walk back to town. The man stared at him. In the dark? Sheriff Callahan will want to hear your story. The man looked at Elena. Something moved in his expression. Not quite anger. More like recalculation. Her father will send more men, he said. You know that. I know it. This doesn't end here. Daniel nodded. No, he agreed. It doesn't. He gestured with the rifle. Start walking. Dawn broke pale and cold over the prairie when they rode back into Harrow Creek. Sheriff Callahan was already on the porch of the jailhouse, coffee in hand, watching the road like he'd been expecting exactly this. He looked at the gray hat man walking ahead of Daniel's mule. He looked at Elena, riding behind Daniel. He looked at the dried blood on Daniel's sleeve from where a bullet had grazed his forearm in the dark. Well, Callahan said. Had company, Daniel said. I see that. He nodded to the deputies. They took the man inside. Callahan stepped down into the street. He looked at Elena. You all right? Yes. He looked at Daniel. You know her father will send more. So I've been told. You still planning to help her? Daniel looked at Elena in the early light, at the marks still fading on her wrists, at the steadiness in her face that hadn't broken once since the trading post. Someone has to, he said. Callahan nodded slowly. He stepped back onto the porch. I'll send word to the federal marshal, he said. Man who puts a bounty on his daughter has other things he doesn't want looked at closely. Daniel nodded. He turned toward the northern road, where the prairie opened wide and pale under the new morning. Elena guided her horse beside him. Where are we going? She asked. Daniel thought about it. North, he said. Far enough that it takes them a while to catch up. And after that? He looked at her. After that, we figure out how to make sure they stop. Elena looked at the horizon. I'm not running forever, she said. No, Daniel agreed. At some point, we turn around and face it. He nodded. At some point. She held his gaze. Soon. Daniel felt the weight of that word settle over him, like weather coming in. Soon, he said. They rode north as the sun lifted over the hills, and somewhere behind them, in a jailhouse cell, A man with a gray hat was already thinking about the next message he'd send east. And somewhere east of everything, a man who owned mines and believed that daughters were a category of property was reading a letter that told him his investment had walked away. He would not take that quietly. He never had. But then again, Elena Moore had spent 3 days tied to a rope, sold twice, left standing in a yard while men pretended not to see, and she was still standing. That was the thing about the frontier. It didn't care about money or names, or what a man back east decided he owned. It only cared what you did when the moment came. Daniel Mercer had cut a rope. Elena Moore had raised a rifle in the dark. The story wasn't finished, but they were still in it. And sometimes, out here, that was the whole point.